Welcome to EFT MBA Mastering Business Acumen with the help of EFT business experts. Learn the marketing, mindset, and skill set you need to create the EFT coaching practice of your dreams. Visit www.eftmba.com for more information. And now, here's the EFT training team that embodies the art and science of EFT. Alina Frank and Dr. Craig Weiner.
All right, welcome to the show this week, and we are in the same room, which is unusual for us. We usually do our show from two different locations, but here we are together.
Way more fun.
Yeah, it is more fun. So today we are going to talk about the very important subject of boundaries. Yeah, for sure. So I remember whenever anyone asked me to talk about this topic, I remember doing a workshop up in Vancouver about this, and what we started the conversation about was the research study that was presented where they had children with their caregivers in a yard outside, and they had in that yard they had a fence, right, a boundary around this yard, and then they did the experiment without the fence. And what they discovered with these little children was that these kids would go and explore every part of the yard if it was fenced. If it wasn't fenced, amazing, these kids would not roam very far from their caregivers. Do you remember that?
I do, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what that says to me is that clear boundaries actually provide space for greater freedom of exploration, a greater sense of safety, even, that I can explore farther aspects of my world when there's some container to it, some boundaries put in place.
Definitely. And the thing is that those kids felt safe. Right. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about with this is how it is that this creates safety for everyone.
Now, that is a little tricky for a lot of people, because I think for many people, the minute you start talking about boundaries, they went, no, I want freedom, I want space, I don't want rules, I don't want boundaries, I want to be able to explore whatever I want to explore. And so the idea of setting clear boundaries is provocative for many people. It creates a sense of resistance. Right.
And so what I want to really say is that as a professional, and all of the things that we discuss on the show are really meant to increase your business and have you be successful in your business. And so we see that the EFT coaches that I coach, sometimes we will discover that weak boundaries is one of the main reasons why they're not doing as well as they should be. And so I just want to reiterate that you can be nice, you can be welcoming, you can establish great rapport with a client, but up front you need to know that you aren't your client's friend. And a lot of us that come into the healing arts and come into EFT, we really have caretaker tendencies. You know, from early on, taking care of other people. That's part of why we got into this work. But those will not serve you very well if you don't have clear boundaries. Caretaking is very different than helping someone, assisting someone, guiding someone, empowering people. That's what you want to do ultimately with your EFT work.
Yeah. Compassion is one thing, caretaking is another.
Yeah. Yeah, and you need to have really strong boundaries and role model these boundaries for your clients, because guess what? A lot of people that are coming to you who have serious issues, they've never had strong boundaries. So you are teaching by example the way that you conduct your session, what happens before, what happens after, all the communications, all of that. You are a role model for your clients. And if you don't have clean, strong boundaries, they're not going to learn that from you. And like I said, many have never learned it from any relationship. Yeah. So it's important for you to know that.
Yeah. And you setting clear boundaries Doesn't mean necessarily that they'll learn that immediately.
No,
but,
you might have to. You might have to reinforce that.
Right.
And I think that for the most part, I mean, I've heard a couple of scenarios that were, almost nightmarish, but for the most part, I think that people pick up on it right away. They pick up on your tone, they pick up on the boundary, and if you have to reinforce it once or twice, then that's just part of what you do, and they go on. So let's talk about why these are important. We have 5 different things here, items that we have listed about the importance of talking about boundaries.
Yeah.
Number one,
why talk about boundaries? Why they're important? Because you setting clear boundaries as a practitioner will help you to prevent from having practitioner burnout.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely, and we're in it for the long term here. We are here to coach coaches to be able to thrive financially and to be able to thrive with ease and joy and to have a practice that they can't wait to get up to and work with the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when boundaries are not clear? The squeaky wheels start squeaking, right? So the problem people start showing up more with greater and greater problems because you from the very beginning didn't say, oh, my hours are between this and this. This is how you can communicate with me, et cetera, et cetera. The clearer you are from the very beginning, the more that people will follow that and not continually to be irritating in the ways that you don't want them to communicate and work with you.
Right. So that was burnout from the perspective of the coach.
Right.
And so the next item that we have is from the perspective of the client, you reduce misunderstanding.
Sure. So in other words, you, let's just say, contacted the client. They contacted you and you called them back at 9 o'clock in the evening to get back to them because you were anxious to get a new client. Well, you just set up the tone that you're open for communication at 9 p.m. So then the next time they have to reach you, call you at 9 p.m., thinking that they can get a hold of you. Well, apparently you have hours that last that long, so you're the one that called me the first time. So in other words, when we have, the clearer we are with setting up those boundaries at the beginning, it's all about prevention. Because what we're doing, things often start out smoothly, but it's the times when, what do you mean you can't work with my spouse? What do you mean we can't set up a weekend appointment? What do you mean, if you didn't set up those boundaries at the beginning, their expectations are not going to be the same as yours. Right. I promise you that.
Right. Yeah, it does. It reduces misunderstandings. So number 3, without boundaries, you or your client may overstep your client-coach relationship, and that person will never see you the same way again.
Well, once you hit one of those situations in which a communication was misunderstood, they thought that you were going to do this and you didn't, trust gets eroded.
Yeah.
And even though that they may forgive and even though you may get past it, there is still often this little check mark of, the next time something happens like that, unless they tapped it away, which they may or may not have, that still is going to be there influencing future communications and future work together. It just does.
Sure. Absolutely. If they see you in a professional capacity and they hold you in that regard, your word, your tapping suggestions, your recommendations for homework hold a lot more weight. They're coming to you to help them. They're not coming to you to talk or for you to be their friend, because that route hasn't worked for them. That is why they are paying you. So don't lose sight of that.
Good.
Okay. So number 4. So this is very real. So, some of these, okay, burnout, okay, misunderstanding, okay, so I overstepped it and I became friends with my client. No. Number 4 is big, and so is number 5. But number 4 is you or your client may open yourselves up to trauma with a big T, small t, trauma occurring as a result of a weak boundary.
Yeah, in other words, I had, after a session on a Friday, went into a pretty big reaction to the work that we did. I should be able to, you're my person, we worked on the trauma together, I should be able to reach you Friday night or Saturday, so that you could help me get through this. And you're thinking, I don't work on that, your next session is next week, you haven't set up any way, and now all of a sudden, that lack of ability to reach you to resolve this is now triggering the abandonment that happened when their father left when they were 7 years old. Or some other scenario that was a much bigger one that's being triggered by what just happened with the interaction with you.
Right. You have a weak boundary, and let's say a client is finding you to be more of a friend. Then when you can't be there as a friend for them, because all of a sudden you're waking up to the fact, holy cow, I've overstepped my boundary here, then they will feel hurt. You will add to the wound that they've had through recapitulation, through the compulsion to repeat the trauma. It's very easy. It's easier than you think. And so setting that up, that weak boundary where you're friends, you're socialized, you just loosey-goosey with your hours, that kind of thing, you can actually be falling into the trap of replaying a traumatic event from their past or from your own. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really critical. You, again, setting up the boundaries, while it doesn't eliminate the possibility, it strongly reduces the likelihood of this happening.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
Last one?
So the last one is, why are we talking about this? Legal issues.
Yes. Okay. We want to reduce the likelihood in any way of any legal action, really. So depending on whether you're a mental health care provider or a coach or whatever capacity you're practicing in, you have to know the possibility of a misunderstanding, especially if there was an early trauma around it, and now all of a sudden they feel abandoned by you or anything else. If you haven't put in place all your legal disclaimers on your forms, your informed consent, reviewed all of those things in advance, the likelihood of there being a repercussion is enhanced, whether it's by them directly or a family member that they've shared, or they've shared something with a therapist that then you were not clear, for example, of your boundaries with regard to your professional vocation and what your boundaries are as a coach, for example, and what you're able and not able to discuss, all of those things. You just have to set those very clear from the very beginning in your informed consent. You're reiterating that during the course of the relationship. These boundaries are not a one-time venture that's done in a single form, right, or done as a disclaimer on a website, etc. This is a continual process, right, that's getting amended and worked with and reiterated, because especially when people start working with you and they're really in their negative emotionalness, they're not listening so well to all those rules also. So I know as a chiropractor working with people in pain, the things I say on the first day when they're in a lot of pain, they maybe only heard 30% of that.
Right.
Right? So they're being hijacked by their pain or their emotional pain or their physical pain. So the things that we're talking about, the boundary setting, needs to be repeated in different ways.
Yep.
And at different times.
So before we talk about the actual things that you need to look at to create strong boundaries in your practice, let's talk about the signs of weak boundaries. So there are some obvious signs, and if you fall into these, you can, if you check any of these, then you really need to stop and ask yourself why this is going on and see what boundaries you need to shore up in your practice to avoid these. A sign of a weak boundary is going extra time in a session.
Oh, what's wrong with that? I do that all the time. No, I don't. I'm kidding. But I know people that do.
Yeah.
We've had students and mentees in the MBA program and that we've taught that habitually go over time because they're being of service.
Right.
Maybe they don't consider themselves a caregiver, but they're compassionate. They just can't cut people off all the time, and people are processing. And, our session goes into 80 minutes, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So if it happens repeatedly, this is an issue.
It's a sign. It's a sign of a weak boundary. All right. Next is extra sessions.
Sure, because
like
we didn't finish the work, so we'll continue it next Monday?
Next Monday that I'm not charging you for. Week boundary.
Yeah, because apparently as a practitioner, I was responsible for completing working with that trauma, and I didn't. So now, okay, we'll continue next week, and you don't have to pay for it.
Okay. Here's one that we do have to work with our students on quite frequently. It's reduced fees.
Ooh,
that's
see that a lot.
Yeah, the week boundary. Okay, let's hear how that shows up as a week boundary.
As a week boundary, well, number one is you provide a sliding scale, and continually people always choose the lowest sliding scale. That's still working within the boundaries you gave, but if you notice that nobody ever pays full price, and you're always getting people kind of bargaining and talking about the last practitioner that didn't charge. You know, you hear a lot of that story all the time. This is a sign that you're not being really clear with your pricings, and that needs some cleaning up and some real distinctness in how you do that.
Right. It also could be that the boundary is so weak that the person sees you as their friend, and they're like, okay, so I really need you. I can't afford it this month. I've got this stuff going on, and then you're reducing fees. That's not to say, let's make this very clear, that's not to say that we're not big proponents of giving back. There is a way to do it. Sliding scale is not it, though. And so in the MBA program, we go over this. But reducing fees, just, you're getting people always wanting reduced fees or, that sort of thing. Last-minute appointments is another thing, that you're always taking last-minute appointments, also sign of a weak boundary.
Well, let's just be clear with that. A last-minute appointment, there are emergencies that come up that we each take. Sometimes something needs to happen, but it's rare.
Yeah.
Right? And it certainly isn't the same person, right? That's a sign of a weak boundary. The same person always has the emergency.
So allowing clients to come in late for a session and then you go over, that's a weak boundary. Right? So they're 10 minutes late and then you tack on 10 minutes at the end of the session.
Yeah. And what about people that call in the morning of an appointment in the afternoon and tell you that they had to take their daughter to a class they didn't expect to, so they need to reschedule?
So we're going to go over how to avoid those things, but that definitely is a sign of weak boundary. Something else that is maybe not so cut and dry, but something to think about and keep in the back of your mind if you feel like this is an issue for you is you see yourself wanting more healing than the client wants for themselves.
What do you mean by that?
You want them to stop quitting, smoking cessation. You want them to quit smoking, and it's so important to you that they're like, okay, so I think I want to reduce my smoking down from a pack and a half a day to like 5 cigarettes a day, and you're really tied into the outcome more than they are. That's a sticky wicket, and it also may be signs that, gee, maybe your dad died of lung cancer or something like that as a coach. Something to be wary of is that you want as much healing for your clients as they want for themselves. Yeah, and let go of desired outcomes.
Right, that personal projection. Yeah. I mean, especially strong with addictions and, like you're saying, smoking and weight loss and all of those.
Right. Yeah. So we have a friend who's the head of a big mental health department in her state, and what she says is, you can tell that this is sticky when you find yourself so drawn into your client's story that you're like, you're waiting in rapt attention for the next thing that they say. Yeah, that is not being detached and compassionate. That is being sucked in and possibly having a weak boundary. Okay, so now that you have some signs here, maybe this sounds like you. All is not lost.
Or your friend. Maybe it's your friend.
Your friend. So all is not lost. Let's talk about the things that you need to do. So, Craig, you brought up something right before we got on the air here. You brought up something that I thought was really important to say about what to do.
Yeah. Well, it's actually when to start. When do you start setting boundaries? Mm-hmm. Right, with the client intake form, when you go over and form, where does it start? Well, it starts with the very first communication. Mm-hmm. It actually starts with whatever material is online. If they found you online, it begins with how you set the tone in your website. Do you have disclaimers? Do you have the things in place that are clear how they should communicate with you?
Policies and procedures.
Right. In other words, can they contact you via phone, via email? All those things are starting to set up of, please, how to contact me. If you do a consultation, many practitioners do, for example, a 15-minute free consultation. How do you set up that appointment? Do you, from the very beginning, make sure that it does not go more than 15 minutes, if that's what you offer?
Exactly.
If from the consultation you have set up, well, now she's asking some more questions at the end of the 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the tapping? Well, hold on a minute, I have another question. If you break it from the beginning, it is broken, and it is so hard to get back.
For sure.
Right?
Yep.
So it begins from the beginning, and it continues through the process.
Very good. So you've got your strong policies and procedures. You have your rates that you tell them at some point and you stick to them. You have one of the things that you can do is offer group rates if you want to do that sort of thing, and you can direct people to that.
You got to be more specific.
Yeah, I'm not going to even go into this because we don't have much time left in the show. We always keep it to 30 minutes on the show.
That's a boundary we set. If we don't keep to that, see, they went 39 minutes this time, and they say they keep it to a half hour.
Okay, so avoid dual relationships. So, but Craig, what about my friends? What about my family?
You have to be more specific with the question. What do you mean about your friends and family?
Yeah, what about my friends and family that I want to coach?
Oh, as a practitioner, you want to coach your friends and family?
Yeah.
I'm going to strongly discourage that.
Why?
Because you have a dual relationship where you're then, at any one point, are you their coach or are you their friend?
Right.
And guess what? Especially when they're in their emotional hijacked, they're not remembering, hey, you're my friend, don't you remember the time we did this together and you were there for me and now you're not being there for me? Oh, you got the coach or whatever.
Right.
So those dual relationships get very tricky, especially when things get rough.
Yeah. So I would say that yes, you can do some coaching and you can do some tapping, but you have to know what boundaries are set for what you're doing in the moment. Now, you can coach your friends because you don't have a clear agreement with them, and it's a casual one-time thing. If they come repeatedly to have you help them, then it is time to think about either referring or coming up with some really strict agreements, like you would for any client-coach relationship. The forms, the intake, the process, the structure that's there, you enter into that with your friends and family. And I think that you can do that in a clean way.
I'm going to actually...
But you might not be... What I wanted to add was you might not be the best person to serve them.
Exactly.
Right. Because it could be about you. The issues could very well be about you, or they don't feel comfortable enough because you have the dual relationship that they can't open up to you as much as they would with somebody that they are hiring as a professional in a professional capacity with confidentiality.
Yeah, and you as a friend want to help.
Yeah. Of
course you do. Any friend does. But you have to look at the bigger picture and how they're going to be best served.
Exactly. Okay. So then another thing to avoid is you don't meet your clients socially. Right? You don't meet your clients socially.
Out for drinks?
No.
Why not?
No,
you guys are like the same age and you're both in the Sierra Club. And
because that goes back to avoiding dual relationships. Are you a friend or are you a client?
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Avoid helping with money or with transportation or giving your clients gifts or receiving expensive gifts from clients.
Now, wait a minute. You want to block their gratitude for all the great work that you've done? You want to throw that back in their face?
I'm sorry. It gets sticky.